Well, now I guess it's your turn, little big tracker. Gotta do some work on you now. Wonderful. Oh well, that's cars for you. Yep, we're back again with a Chevy tracker. This is not really the original one, but it's the second one we had, but it needs a little work. It's got some oil leaks. Now, the way it looks, one might think rear main seal, but I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be the oil pan or the valve cover gaskets, because, well, there's oil residue all over the engine in spots that would make you think it's probably a valve cover gasket leaking or even the oil pan. But I at least want to try the easy stuff first before I have to resort to some drastic measures, such as pulling the engine out to change a rear main seal right off the bat. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the change our oil pan gasket first, because that's the first part that came in the mail. And to do that, make it easy, we're gonna get up on some ramps here to slide up underneath, and I'm gonna have to jack the engine up and kind of prop the engine up off of its mountings, so we'll have the clearance to be able to remove the oil pan, or at least be able to get the gaskets off and on again. So let's get to it. Go ahead and get this thing on the ramps. Stand by. Well, we're underneath the tracker, which is on ramps, and as I stated, there's oil residue everywhere. Oil on the rack and pinion, which could be just power steering oil. You can clearly see oil all over the oil pan here, residue all around the rim of the oil pan right there, the base. Oil on this bracket right here, this mounting bracket. Let's see what else. Look up here, there's oil residue all along the side of the block. Oil on the transmission bell housing all the way back along the bottom of the transmission. Oil on the bottom of the floors. Oil on the catalytic converter and on the floor over the catalytic converter. And, well, there's just oil residue everywhere. And like I say, it makes it kind of hard to pinpoint because, well, it's not actually dripping out. That would imply that it's a rear main or anything definite. So we're more or less fishing right now. But we're gonna start off draining this oil pan here, get that crap out. Then we also have, let's see, got a couple of nuts right here. Look up right there. There we go. There's a couple nuts right there. There's also a bolt on the top that would probably be an easier bet to get if we just don't want to pull it loose right here. But this is actually easier to reach because up there you got to go bend around with U-joints and extensions and everything. But same thing right there on that motor mount right there. They look like 14 millimeter nuts. So we got our 14 millimeter nuts, and these little bitty bolts on the oil pan itself look like possibly 8 millimeter. I have to see. They're more likely 8 millimeter. But because of the rack and pinion right here, tight clearance right there, we're pretty much going to have to jack the engine up in order to get the necessary clearance to get this thing off. So yeah, let me go ahead and take some junk off. Okay, a couple things to make note of before we jack our engine up. One thing you'll want to disconnect is the hose here for this power steering pump reservoir, because as you do climb up higher, this hose is going to also climb up higher, and it's going to pull loose, and you're going to make a hot mess all over you because you'll be underneath this thing while it happens. Next thing that has to come off is this bar right here, because if you look right here, you've got very little clearance right there between that intake plenum and that bar. Now, I took the liberty of removing these bolts. They're just simple little 14 millimeter bolts. So you could knock those off real quick with a impact or a regular ratchet. But get this bar off right here. So we get everything jacked up, then go up under here, and I have this wonderful setup here with a regular jack and a 4x4 to give me the reach to hit our oil pan right here, so I could actually jack this thing up high enough to be able to reach the point I need to be able to get these little 2x4 blocks up under these motor mount brackets and motor mounts, so we can hold the engine in a high position to allow us to remove our oil pan. So go ahead and start jacking this joker up, and get our engine going and going and going up. Always got to make note of everything as you do jack the thing up, so you don't jack nothing up in the process. I'm going to get off this camera and get these blocks in place. Stand by. Okay, I was a little bit off, as I tend to be sometimes with metric sizes. These are actually 10 millimeter, but yeah, go ahead and knock these out. At least the ones I could get easily with our impact wrench, because the ones in the front are going to be a bit of a pain in the butt to get to. And this oil pan, just like on some of the older V8s, actually has little studs at the timing cover instead of regular bolts. So that's kind of a cool thing. But yeah, let me go ahead and get up in here and remove all these bolts. Looks like about 14 of them maybe. I'll let you know. But again, stand by. Alright, got all our bolts out, but this pan here was apparently glued up very well. Still doesn't stop it from leaking at times, but hopefully. But yeah, I'm gonna have to knock this thing loose, which to do that you could either use a flathead screwdriver or a pick or something, and you really just want to kind of work out all that glue goop gasket sealer crap in different spots until you could get to enough of a point where you can get a little prying action. Not too much, because you don't want to warp the lip of the oil pan where it'll never seal again. So just take your time and work this glue out of here, and just kind of keep working it along a seam and widen your stretch along the seam until you get enough of it free that the pan drops down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and get our pan off. If you don't feel like doing what I was just talking about, there's always the caveman approach, which is just using a hammer and knocking it free. So yeah, you could either go overcomplicated or caveman. Sometimes caveman works. Let's get our pan off. Found out an interesting little thing about our setup here. Apparently this oil pan was held in place with gasket maker exclusively. There is no gasket in here that I can actually see. If it is super damn thin. But yeah, so gonna have to go ahead and scrape all this garbage off. But the way our oil pan is situated right here, this is gonna be a bit of a problem, because, well, our pickup is, well, in the way. And I have to see about how the hell I'm going to get that out of here. Because as long as that pickup is in here, this pan is not coming out. So let's see what else I got to pull out. Stand by. Okay, to remedy our problem with the oil pickup, I had to remove the oil pickup. It's 3 10 millimeter bolts, 2 on the oil pump and 1 on the bracket holding it to the block right here. After I got that down, then I was able to work the pan and then twist it around and get it out kind of perpendicular to the engine block, so it wasn't that bad after getting all that garbage disconnected. But come out here, and this is the monstrosity we're working with. Like I said, It almost appears that this thing did not have a gasket at all. It just had a layer of gasket maker smeared all over the lip of the oil pan in a thick enough amount that it served as the gasket. I have seen this before, and it's a stupid idea because besides the ability to start leaking profusely, it could sometimes make an oil pan a pain in the butt to get off. But that wasn't the case with us. We got it off. So let me clean this garbage up and see what we're working with on our new oil pan. Stand by. All right. I took time to clean up all the old gasket goop that was on this oil pan. As stated before, apparently this thing had a thick layer of gasket maker in place of an actual gasket. So both surfaces, that includes the block, are cleaned up. I took a moment to apply some glue to the pan and glue the gasket down and let it sit so everything will be nice and sturdy and lined up, so when I put this pan back up, nothing will shift around. All I'll do is just apply a thin layer of gasket maker on this surface right before I put the pan back up. Taking a quick look at our oil pickup, it looks pretty good. It's clean. There ain't a bunch of trash up in there, so at least that's a good sign as far as the overall health of the engine when it comes to whether this thing is ingesting garbage, whether it's from disintegrating piston rings or whatever. But yeah, go underneath the block real quick. Like I said, I took a moment to clean that surface off just as well. Everything, for all intents, looks pretty good. So with that, we'll go ahead and glue up our gasket, get our pan back up so we can get everything snugged up and get this block back down on its mounts so we can conclude this little job. Stand by. Before we can get our oil pan fully secured, we still have to get our oil pickup secured, which involve the 3 10mm bolts, one being on that little bracket right there and the 2 on the oil pump. Once you get that all said and done, now you'll be able to put your oil pan all the way back up and lock her down. I'll go ahead and get that done. All right, we got our oil pan back in place. It's 19 bolts and, well, 2 nuts and 17 bolts, but all of them are in place, snugged down. You don't want to just tighten the crap out of them, otherwise you might damage the oil pan or warp the lip a little bit. I don't have the exact torque number, but it's not hand tight obviously, and it definitely ain't super torqued down. I mean, if you're a car guy, you'll pretty much have a good idea of what's snug. But the bolts are down. Now the next thing is to get our jack and board back in place under the pan so we could lift the engine up, get these 2x4s out of the way, and lower our engine back down onto the mounting brackets and get all that secured. So that'll be fun, because we're talking about trying to line up these 2 studs for each of these brackets there. So gonna have to probably shift this thing around a little bit until it finally just pops in place. So stand by. To make things a little bit easier to get one side lined up, I got the thing lowered down just before the studs were actually touching the holes, and then used a giant screwdriver to kind of work the mount in line with these holes just enough, and then I lowered the thing a little bit more so the tips of these studs were just inside the holes here, enough so that I'll still be able to get the other side going the same way. So with that lined up, I can now move on to the other side. All right, got the other mount seated down. I was actually able to just kind of use my finger to work the thing in a somewhat safe manner to line it up enough while I lowered the jack down to get the studs into the bracket. But both sides are in, nuts and washers are in place. So now I go ahead and torque this Torque this garbage down, get into a better position here. Get the other side here. All right. That is done. Last thing is our cross member on top. But the thing is, let me get up there real quick and I'll show you. The little brace cross member thingy, it just sits in place here, 3 bolts on each side. I'm not securing it because I have one more job I'm going to have to do, and you'll see that in another video, and that's replace our valve cover gasket. So I'm going to leave that disconnected for now so I can pull that back off, since that is part of the procedure. But as far as our oil pan gasket, that is all done. Don't forget to put your power steering hose back on. I have to get a pair of pliers for that little spring clamp, but don't forget to put that back on, otherwise you're going to have a hot mess when you start your engine up. But yep, that's pretty much the gist of replacing an oil pan gasket on a J20 2.0 4-cylinder Suzuki engine in a Tracker, Suzuki Vitara, or similar vehicle. So until the next time, as usual, like, subscribe, notifications, all that good stuff. And stay tuned for the oil pan gasket job. That will be next.